morning, everyone. Welcome to the Air Daily Live Update. Today we have some update about new COVID variant and what is happening in the Brisbane. Let's start with today's weather. Temperature is 27 degrees outside and it's humid also. The first news is coming from the Belmont factory. Owners of Belmont Commercial Laundry remain devastated after a fierce flame broke through the building and black toxic smoke spewed into the air, causing the building to collapse. Let's watch the complete news. The next news is coming from the Brett Sutton. It's saying like there is a new COVID variant and there is some information regarding to it. Let's watch this news.
So on the new variant of concern, what we do know about Omicron is really not enough. There's a lot more that we don't know and that we need to find out. The key questions really are, is it more transmissible? And how transmissible exactly is it? It certainly seems to have spread very quickly in Southern Africa and in the Republic of South Africa in particular, across many provinces, and the numbers have increased very significantly over a short period of time. It has become the predominant variant in that country already in a very short period of time, so it is likely to be a very transmissible variant, but we will have greater clarity on that in coming days and weeks. There's also the question of whether it produces more serious disease or indeed potentially milder disease than the Delta variant. That isn't known yet. It will be much clearer in the next couple of weeks with a rapidly increasing caseload in Southern Africa in particular. We would expect to see that playing out in hospitalised cases if it is indeed as serious a disease as Delta or more serious. And then there's the big question as to whether there's some vaccine escape or whether the immunity from the vaccines that have been given around the world is going to be sufficient to protect against transmission with this variant and severe disease with this variant. That isn't known yet. It'll probably take some weeks to find that out. We know that some vaccinated individuals have gotten this variant already, and some people who've been previously infected have gotten this variant, but that's true for Delta as well. So we really do need a few more weeks to understand exactly how much protection from the vaccines that have been given in Australia will protect against this particular variant.
What do we know here in Australia about this new strain?
So what do we know? Firstly, this is a variant of concern, this Omicron variant. It's the 13th variant that's had that designation from the World Health Organisation. Why are we concerned? Firstly, genetically, there are quite a few changes to this virus. I will stress it's still the same SARS-CoV-2 virus we've become used to, but it is different from previous versions. And there are some suggestions from that genetic variation that there could be changes in severity, transmissibility, or indeed interference with the efficacy of vaccines and treatments. On those, firstly, on severity, there is some signs in South Africa, but particularly those in other countries, and that number is growing overnight, that it is relatively mild compared with previous versions. But it's early days and we need to be careful of that, but there's no sign that it's more severe at the moment. Secondly, transmissibility, it does transmit from person to person quite readily, at least as well as the Delta virus, and so that means that it will spread. And thirdly, in terms of the vaccines, there is no solid evidence at the moment that there is a problem with that. But we are looking very closely and we're looking for further advice and laboratory studies in coming days and weeks.
OK, that's all sounding fairly promising. On vaccines, Paul Kelly, it is still part of, I guess, the COVID virus family. Could, in the worst case scenario, vaccines be tweaked effectively, the existing vaccines tweaked to counter Omicron?
Yeah, well, so firstly, that may not be necessary, but if it was the case, we've already heard from several of the vaccine manufacturers, including two of those, well, all three, in fact, that are licensed here, that they're working on that. So Moderna, for example, put out a press release on the very next morning after the variant was said to be of concern to say that they were working on a specific vaccine for that variant. It is one of the major technological and scientific advantages that has happened from this pandemic, that mRNA platform can be changed very quickly. And the other ones, also AstraZeneca, can change the makeup of their vaccine very quickly. So we are well placed if that was to be the case, but I would stress at the moment there's no evidence that would actually be necessary.
What do we know here in Australia about this new strain?
So what do we know? Firstly, this is a variant of concern, this Omicron variant. It's the 13th variant that's had that designation from the World Health Organization. Why are we concerned? Firstly, genetically, there are quite a few changes to this virus. I will stress it's still the same SARS-CoV-2 virus we've become used to, but it is different from previous versions. And there are some suggestions from that genetic variation that there could be changes in severity, transmissibility, or indeed interference with the efficacy of vaccines and treatments. On those, firstly, on severity, there is some signs in South Africa, but particularly those in other countries, and that number is growing overnight, that it is relatively mild compared with previous versions. But it's early days and we need to be careful of that, but there's no sign that it's more severe at the moment. Secondly, transmissibility, it does transmit from person to person quite readily, at least as well as the Delta virus, and so that means that it will spread. And thirdly, in terms of the vaccines, there is no solid evidence at the moment that there is a problem with that. But we are looking very closely and we're looking for further advice and laboratory studies in coming days and weeks.
OK, that's all sounding fairly promising. On vaccines, Paul Kelly, it is still part of, I guess, the COVID virus family. Could, in the worst case scenario, vaccines be tweaked effectively, the existing vaccines tweaked to counter Omicron?
Yeah, well, so firstly, that may not be necessary, but if it was the case, we've already heard from several of the vaccine manufacturers, including two of those, well, all three, in fact, that are licensed here, that they're working on that. So Moderna, for example, put out a press release on the very next morning after the variant was said to be of concern to say that they were working on a specific vaccine for that variant. It is one of the major technological and scientific advantages that has happened from this pandemic, that mRNA platform can be changed very quickly. And the other ones, also AstraZeneca, can change the makeup of their vaccine very quickly. So we are well placed if that was to be the case, but I would stress at the moment there's no evidence that would actually be necessary.
Is the closure of Australia's international border one of the options on the table?
We have taken swift and proportionate action in that regard over the weekend. Minister Hunt and myself did make that announcement on Saturday in relation to those 9 southern African countries. So that's very much in line with what most
But I'm
most
asking
other
more
countries in the
broadly,
world are doing.
closing the border to all countries. Is that on the table?
I spoke with a colleague at the Ministry of Health in Israel yesterday. That's a decision they've made. They've had that's for their own. Of course, they're a sovereign nation; they can make that decision, and that relates to their specific circumstances in Israel. But most other countries in the world at the moment are concentrating on that place where we know there is virus circulating in probably quite large numbers in South Africa and the other nations that we're looking at. I'll continue to give that best advice to the government. It ultimately is a decision for the national government, for the federal government, and they listen. I've already spoken to the Prime Minister and the Minister this morning, and we've been talking several times over the weekend, and I'll continue to give that advice.
Okay, so based on those conversations, the Prime Minister and the Premiers and the Chief Ministers would happily agree. I mean, there's been nothing happy about it, of course, but would agree to the advice, if you needed to give it, that the international border to all countries should close.
Well, as I said, I'm not going to speculate on government decisions, but we're watching very closely and actively engaging with our international partners in the scientific field, but also the diplomatic field, to get a sense for how the world is going with this. And as I said, there are a lot of things we don't know yet about this virus. As that information comes, then that will guide the decision making.
Out of an abundance of caution, short of the border being closed, and no one wants that clearly, but should a blanket 14-day hotel quarantine regime be brought back for all arrivals in Australia, both Australians and visitors?
So we're taking a risk-balanced approach at the moment and concentrating on those 9 southern African countries where we've increased our surveillance at the border and after the border. We're working very closely with our colleagues in New South Wales and Victoria, particularly because they're the ones that have had quarantine-free travel, as well as in the ACT, as to what is the best approach. At the moment, we've bought time to get more information and to consider that balance, but there's always pros and cons for these sorts of decisions, and that's what we're doing at the moment. We had AHPPC met over the weekend every day. We'll have another meeting today. There'll be further discussions on that matter, and when decisions are made, of course, we'll always communicate those.
You can see how powerful and ferocious these spill events are. Up to 80 gigalitres of water is bursting out of Warragamba Dam. It's dropping about 100 metres into this spillway, and all of this water is heading straight to the Nepean River. Heavy rain has been impacting the catchment for days, and it reached its capacity about 9 o'clock last night. Yet this is small compared to the spill event in March that peaked at 500 gigalitres a day. This is the 4th spill to occur since March and could last an entire week. People have driven to Warragamba to see the spectacle as the water gushed out, dropping about 100 metres before heading to nearby rivers and tributaries.
I've been up here when I was a young fella, and it was great to see it today. Yeah, really good. Good to see the water spilling over.
There's so much water and it looks like a water slide.
The dam has been rising due to heavy and persistent rain, with it receiving about 38 gigalitres a day. There's also a flood warning for the Hawkesbury Nepean Valley, with the overflow likely to have impacts downstream.
The next news is coming from the again regarding the Omicron new variant. Let's listen and watch this news.
The true answer is we are going to have to wait and see because it's going to take some time to understand how serious the threat is. It's definitely a very new variant. There's a lot of differences between this variant and the previous ones in terms of changes to the makeup of the virus. And the places that it's changed are places that we know from previous variants are dangerous spots. They either make the virus more transmissible or make it easier for the virus to evade the vaccine or natural immunity from previous COVID. So there's reason to be concerned, but there's not reason to panic. We don't think that, even if there'll be less effect of the vaccine, it's really unlikely that there won't be any effect of the vaccine. So we won't be back to ground zero. We won't be back to, March of last year. And we also know that all the things that we have that protect us against COVID-19 that aren't vaccines, the non-pharmacologic interventions like mask wearing, social distancing, and ventilation, those things will work against any variant. So we have a lot of tools. We've learned a lot. So people should be concerned, but no one should be panicking right now.
What do we know about the symptoms?
Well, right now, I don't think we have any reason to believe the symptoms are different, but it's a really good point because, it may be that the symptoms are slightly different. We found that with Delta, the symptoms were a bit different than with the original COVID and with Alpha. People were getting a lot more headaches, but that might be just because we were finding a lot more, we were finding just about everybody who had Delta because of the incredible testing that we did. But it's an important thing that we need to be on the lookout to see if the symptoms are a bit different. But I think that they'd be very similar. So fever, cough, sniffles, and headache, things like that. Shortness of breath. Those would be symptoms, and also the loss of taste that a lot of people have had with COVID.
So you mentioned, things other than the vaccine, so using the mask and all the rest of it. What do you think about suggestions from some that all international arrivals need to be going back into hotel quarantine?
Well, this is another great point because what we've seen is that it's already spread pretty far. Like now that we know about it, we found it in traveling passengers throughout the world. So we know that it's in New South Wales, so it actually has gotten into Australia, Belgium, Germany, the UK, Hong Kong. So Netherlands, at least 61 people in the Netherlands have COVID. We don't know if they all have Omicron, but they were from South Africa. So we know that it's spread through international travelers quite far. We don't know how long it's been spreading for. So it was found in early November, but we don't know if we think that it had developed before then. It was probably growing much more slowly before it was discovered. So it's possible that it's spread further, and we don't know about it yet. So that's why the thinking is that it might be more prudent to have some type of quarantine or restrictions on all international travel until we've really sorted it out. So I think that these are still really early days, so we'll see in the next couple of days how things, if suddenly we see it taking off elsewhere in the world.
Yeah, I guess, Nancy Baxter, given what everyone in Australia, in a lot of states, especially Victoria and New South Wales, have been through over the last couple of years, there's that sense of, oh no, what does this mean for us domestically? And I'm guessing from the way you're talking, we just don't know.
I think that anyone who says anything different really is not telling the truth, but we will know. So it won't take us long to know. And one of the things that I think is really important for your listeners to know is that the scientists are already starting to work on this. They're already starting to try to figure out if in the lab it's more or less evasive to vaccines, whether the vaccines work as well. And if the vaccines don't work reasonably well on this, they're already on their way to making new vaccines. So, instead of it taking a year and a half to get a vaccine that we could put in an arm, we're talking about weeks to months. So 100 days is one of the things I've heard, and I've heard even less. So to be able to develop an effective tool to combat this will be a remarkably short length of time. So, this isn't good, and I can understand why people are concerned, and they're really, at their wits' end by having yet one more thing with COVID, especially, close to Christmas. But but we have made remarkable strides in dealing with this virus. So if it is something that we need to develop new vaccines for, they will be developed really with breathtaking speed. It's amazing how quickly science is reacting to this.
There is a huge question going on in the scientists related to this new COVID variant. And there is a news this new COVID variant has confirmed in 2 overseas travelers in NSW. Let's watch this complete news.
It emerged in southern Africa. It's been detected in Europe, Asia and the Middle East. And now Omicron is here.
We need to learn to live alongside the virus and also learn to live alongside the various strains of the virus that will come our way.
2 people from New South Wales have the Omicron variant of COVID-19, a new strain of concern. Both are fully vaccinated and in a quarantine facility.
This just clearly demonstrates that the pandemic is not over.
The 2 passengers landed last night on a Doha to Sydney flight. Both had been to southern Africa. Genomic testing is also underway to see if a Victorian currently isolating in the Howard Springs facility is carrying the strain.
What we do know about Omicron is really not enough. There's a lot more that we don't know and that we need to find out.
There are 9 African countries where the variant is rapidly spreading, so the federal and state government have reintroduced restrictions. Anyone who's visited one of those 9 African nations must now do a fortnight in hotel quarantine. Victoria, New South Wales and the ACT require all vaccinated overseas travellers, no matter where you've been, to isolate for 72 hours. You now need to provide a negative test before travelling to South Australia if you're from Sydney or Melbourne, while WA has reinstated tougher restrictions with South Australia.
Let's not forget what the ultimate objective is here in this global pandemic. The objective is to open safely and remain safely open.
Just weeks after Australia declared it was open to the world, border restrictions and quarantine rules are back. Authorities are now scrambling to contact hundreds of people who've been in the community for the past couple of weeks after visiting those African countries of concern. Right now, little is known about this new variant, but Australia is one of the most vaccinated countries in the world.
At this stage, we have seen no signs in relation to its resistance to vaccines.
A hopeful sign as we learn more about this potentially dangerous strain. Cayman Gok, ABC News.
Definitely it's going to take time to learn about this new variant, but scientists are working. The question will be whether the borders are going to open in the December and how we are going to celebrate our Christmas. The next news is coming from the Scott Morrison. Our Prime Minister is introducing a new anti-troll social media bill. Let's hear from him.
The online world provides many great opportunities, but it comes with some real risks. And we must address these or it will continue to have a very harmful and corrosive impact on our society, on our community. Our government has been taking action on this. We've been standing up and stepping up when it comes to the actions of the big digital media platforms, getting them to pay their tax, making sure they respect and support the freedom of our press, but most importantly, making sure that the rules that exist in the real world must exist in the digital and online world. The online world shouldn't be a wild west where bots and bigots and trolls and others can just anonymously going around and harm people and hurt people, harass them and bully them and sledge them. That's not Australia. That's not what can happen in the real world. And there's no case for it to be able to be happening in the digital world. Australia wants to be, and we are fast on the way to becoming, one of the world's leading digital economies. But for that to be true, the digital world has to be safe. As a parent talking to other parents, I can tell you the thing that concerns us is that our kids are dealing with an online world which we never knew as kids growing up and that we never had experience of. More recent generations have had some experience of that, but I think about our kids going through this today. I think particularly how the online world is used to harass women in particular, They are one of the biggest victims when it comes to the terrible things that we see in the online world. Now, government is stepping up and standing up to those we need to stand up to. There is no place for people to be anonymously going around and undertaking this horrific abuse and harassment and stalking online.
Thank you, Prime Minister, for this anti-troll social media bill. Let's move forward with the next news. International students give up going home for holidays. Let's watch the complete story.
John Shu arrived in Australia when borders were closing to the world.
Unfortunately, we did not get to go back to our home for the last 2 years.
Restricted by a global pandemic, international boarding students were forced to make a home away from home. Most of them were able to stay with other families during term breaks.
For the holidays, I've been very lucky to spend my time out west in Winton, in Goma Station, where I've learned the outback kind of lifestyle.
But the past 2 years have been an anxious time.
I've been checking the news every day, and same as my parents.
Ivan Mann was preparing to sit ATAR exams when he heard he finally had a ticket home to Hong Kong. He couldn't pack his bags fast enough.
Feeling great, of course. I finally get to meet with my family and friends over there. But one thing I'm really worried about is not being able to come back.
Alexis Wong is heading home to Papua New Guinea after studying in Brisbane and is ready to reunite with her family for the first time since the start of the year.
I will go to the islands and we will see dolphins, and they will just follow around the boats. And jet skiing. Jet skiing's fun.
Her roommate Ollie Chappell is keeping herself busy with baking until she flies to Singapore next month to see her family and pets.
It's been quite hard, especially with going up in grades, your schoolwork gets harder, and when you're having trouble you can't have a hug from them.
But getting back into Australia is still a concern, especially for students who aren't Australian citizens.
In some ways that's made things even more difficult for parents who began to feel a glimmer of hope that they would get their daughters home for Christmas.
It's
Thank you everyone for watching Australian Indian Radio Daily Live Updates with Rajni. Stay safe and stay tuned with Australian Indian Radio. See you next time. Till then, goodbye.